Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with two special guests, Rob Clark, the Lone Gunman Podcast, and Bart Kamp of the official archives of Malcom Blunt. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you guys about the assassination. Pleasure to have you guys on. I had a quick question I wanted to start us off with, and let's see where the show really goes. But where do you guys respect or get your credible evidence on Oswald? Because, I mean, throughout all the researchers I've talked to, everyone's got a different depiction of who this guy is. And then obviously they say either as fingerprints of intelligence or he's this lone nut, or it's just so back and forth. I'm just wondering where you guys pull your information from.
Rob, you start.
All right. I would say I pull most of my information from Oswald based on the available documentation, based on what we can glean and piece together from his own words and actions that have been caught on audio, caught on tape, things that we can verify that he did. When you do all that and try to piece it all together, you kind of get a picture of what this guy was doing, at least for me. I don't know about Bart.
Obviously, I went through the motions. When you start reading, studying about this, at first through the books and movies, documentaries, and all that. When it comes to the specifics, I have to say that you see, like I said on a previous podcast, my interest in Oswald was only the period that he was on the morning of the 22nd up till he was dead, and I decided to do that since early 2015. Yeah, January 2015, and then from late 2018, when I got my hands on the Blunt archives, I basically started to read more in depth about it. And of course, with my conversations with Malcolm himself, there was always discussions about the involvement of, his defection and this Central Intelligence Agency files and so forth, and the messing about with those files. It's that part where I thought this is very interesting, because they basically held documentation. One department held his documentation out of sight from other departments as such. That I found really interesting. And the other source, it started actually with Greg Parker's first book. I've read that, and I thought that was really good because he was highlighting elements of that defection. And there's just lots of things that are just fishy, just wrong, and there's just a lot of things where you just go, huh, what? And what was all possible, what he could do. He defected. He comes back to Dallas and New Orleans, and he's only been interviewed a few times, but only by the FBI, and especially in such a moment of the Cold War, when the Cuban Missile Crisis is happening and Russia is the enemy. Yeah, he just waltzes back into the United States, gets a passport, gets a loan from the State Department to go back to the States and all that. It's all these elements where you just go, that's just not kosher. There's just some things there where you just go, there's influence from somebody outside, where phone calls are made and go, yeah, let him go. Because, I know now that, for instance, his passport, he could get that because there was no procedure in place with the State Department in taking their citizenship away or their passports away, or not giving them a new passport, because they had defected as such. Or it could be something that they are hiding behind, and saying, well, it wasn't in place, but at the same time, they're using that as an excuse to basically give him that passport so he can come back as such. The Finland thing, on his way towards Soviet Union, stays in a very plush hotel, very nice room. These bits are like, there's a lot of frowning for that. I mean, that's it for me, basically. But especially the last few years, the documentation that I got my hands on, because even though I was looking for stuff that's relating to my research, I have had tens of thousands of pages of this stuff in front of me, and there's a lot of talk about it, and there's a lot of passing the buck around, and this just a maelstrom of all kinds of elements there, and of course super interesting. But I got to a point where I'm going, if I'm going to delve into this, then I won't have a life left, because I barely have a life left because of the research what I'm doing already. But then if I put that on them, it's too much. But yeah.
Well, just from new eyes looking in, a younger generation, like I said, I've admitted multiple times I don't know much about the assassination. I'm trying. It's a lot. But the one thing is with Oswald, they say he's, a loner. He's this type of social kind of cast out. And obviously you can hear different depictions of him. But then wasn't he involved in the Marines working on U-2 spy planes, or he was working with something in the Marines that happened to do? I know he was involved at a radio factory at some point in Minsk. I know that from the interview with Demenslia, but there's also, was he working in a U-2 spy plane program? Was there was something about him that he was doing for the military that obviously did not fit the standards of just some idiot or some lone, crazy person. There was just something about him that had a little bit more detail to that. So I want to verify if that's true or not. Did he work at some U-2 factory or some type of plane? Anything, you guys ever hear anything like that?
Well, there's stories about Atsugi, the base in Japan where he was working at. He was a radar operator there. There are stories about him. See, this is something that I go, I'm not 100% sure, because I've read bits, but I've never investigated as such, like what is the source material for it. But that he went to the Pleasure Palace or Ho House or some sort of like a club where he basically was in Japan and basically got the clap because of
he got syphilis.
Duty. Yeah, right. There are other bits which can't really be explained that happened while he was there, and whether that has to do with intelligence, I am not read up enough. But Rob knows probably more about this than I do, actually, because Rob has a broader experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a radar operator. And he wasn't at Atsugi in Japan, which was a base where the U-2 was flying out of, going over Russia. And I don't know how much information he would have actually known about the U-2 spy plane itself, but he would have known where it was going, how often it was going there, the altitudes it was flying at, things of that nature, which wouldn't have been, it's not super secret information, but when you put it in the context of, hey, not too long after he defected to Russia, the Russians managed to shoot one down that was flying over him, operated by Gary Powers. And it was kind of a big deal back then because, you didn't want the Russians getting their hands on your technology. So, yeah, I mean, as far as Lee Harvey Oswald is concerned, being a loner, I don't really buy that aspect of how they were trying to portray him in the Warren Commission. Because, at various stages of his life, you can see, I mean, even in Russia, he was surrounded, he had lots of friends in Russia. There's pictures of him hanging out with his friends, being sociable, things of this nature. It's only once he gets back from Russia when he's with Marina and now he's got a baby, you kind of become a loner because you have to be. Now you have a wife and you have a family to take care of. You have to work. You don't go out as much. You don't socialize as much. See, I always hated that portrayal of Lee Harvey Oswald as a despondent loner. I just don't buy that at all.
Well, when he goes to Russia and goes to defect or renounce his citizenship, and they deny him that, and then he ends up traveling back. I'm just curious because they could tell that they thought he was a spy at some point because his Russian was terrible. It wasn't good. But then if you read some documents say that he was trying to become a Russian spy. That's why he was tearing up his U.S. citizenship. So it's got me all types of confused. I mean, I think everyone boils down to the basic point of like he did not like his mother and he was only sending money to her as just, I guess, cover or something like that. Like I said, I'm confused on this whole aspect. If I'm sitting here defending someone saying I don't think he killed the president on the basis of the backyard photographs just don't make sense. Whether you agree that if they're altered or not, I don't know. I don't think they are. Maybe they could be. I mean, I looked into the Stovall company that he was involved in for a brief amount of time. I mean, if he's in, and Bart, you probably could fill in some spots on this, but if he's in that interrogation and he talks about that's my face, but that's not my jaw, I start going, I mean, can a common person be able to point out a Photoshop like that? I mean, you would be able to know if you were involved in that photo, but I start wondering how many kids now Photoshop their face onto things to make a movie poster or make some cool picture for like Instagram. And I go,
Within 30 seconds.
well, I just go, could he have Photoshopped his own face onto a photo?
No, that would have not been Photoshop, but it would have been a way of basically it's called masking. It's a darkroom technique where they basically mask and basically double expose as such. That was possible, and especially at a place like Jagger Stovall, where they were working with a lot of photography as such. He himself had quite a camera collection himself, and that by itself is quite interesting. And to come back to your first bit of your question regarding citizenship, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the evidence consists of people repeating a rumor, but the State Department, Robert Koch, who was the head of the Department of State at that point, he basically said that there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Oswald was going to forfeit his American citizenship as such. So, and that I've got in a document. I posted this document about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So, which is just a gift. And there's just, again, there's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of people saying stuff at the same time. It's like, but where's the document that actually says that? Because that's the beauty of it. Everybody takes certain things for gospel, but where's the actual backup, the source as such that basically states this? And that's my way of researching these days. I can understand that people, in the beginning when I was starting this out back in the 90s, when somebody says that, you take their opinion at face value at that time. Now I don't believe anyone unless I see the document. And I go, no, I need to see the source. Forget about it. Stop all these so-called beliefs. Lone nutters do this. Conspiracy theorists do this as well, and have absolutely no backing whatsoever. And it ought to be dismissed immediately. It's the same as like, did CIA murder Kennedy? Well, I still have to see the document that says that, or any involvement whatsoever. Could be that a few people that had some connections with the agency were involved. It's possible, but I don't see any hard evidence for that. And and until that is, it's just speculation. There's a lot of in this so-called scene industry. There's a lot of speculation. There's way too much speculation. And that's why I'm so hell-bent on the evidence. And that's why I basically dug into the Blunt archives, because the Blunt archives gave me a lot of answers and gave me a lot of extra bits on top. And this is where it gets interesting. And this is where you piss people off, because it's like saying, whatever religion, say Jesus didn't exist, or Jesus didn't say that because such and such and blah, blah, blah. And they get so angry about that. And they refuse to believe that. And they'll call you every name possible. And I call everyone whatever name possible, because I basically find out that they're just talking beliefs. And beliefs are strange. They're just weird overall. I mean, if all these people just spend a bit more time in researching. I mean, for instance, I've put this whole archive together. There's the Weisberg archive and, National Archives. And instead of these people just say, well, instead of reading a book or a chapter from a book, spend an hour, just go to NARA and just go to some documents and just read that. And then you'll come, all right, I didn't know that. All right. So what's related to that? Oh, right. Okay. Now that's interesting. And then when you've read this and there's not much about it on a forum or a podcast or whatever, and say, listen, this is what I found out. And there's too little of that. There's too much like quack, 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 and all unsubstantiated drivel, nothing with a backup whatsoever. And these people ought to be dismissed immediately, especially in what society is on now. I wish people just in general just stop believing everything what is being told and just say, you know what, start questioning, start reading up about it if you do. But then people are apparently too busy to do so, and so forth. But then when the subject gets brought up again, they're straight back at it.
I've tried to take your advice and Larry Hancock's advice when it comes to just going strictly by the documents, but there are things that just counteract, I guess, a lot of things that most people agree on. Like, I know when Oswald was incarcerated, or he was in jail, Marina came by with a photograph that she had in her shoe. Is that true? Because she had a photograph, that one of these backyard photographs, in her shoe, and said, what should I do with this? And she apparently ripped it up and flushed it down as well.
Rubbish.
Okay.
Total utter rubbish.
Because now that's what I said. And the reason why I say that is, and I'll show this document right here, I've been doing nothing but looking through Harold Weisberg's archive. And the only way I can be able to look through that
took me a year.
It's been a mess so far for me, but let me know when you guys can see what I'm about to show on the screen. It should be showing in a second. Did it pop up yet? All right. So basically what everyone was saying was that she had this photograph, showed Oswald the photograph, said, what should I do with this? But everyone had copies. There was like a large number of copies of this backyard photograph. And one thing that I have right here says, on February 25th, 1964, Martha Bucknell, office manager, Washington Bureau of Life magazine, advised her magazine had purchased the above photograph from Miss Marina Oswald through the former agent James Herbert Martin. Miss Bucknell advised his confidence here, New York headquarters are concerned by the publication of this photograph by other news media, and that Life is contemplating suit against those publications. She requested this matter not be given publicity outside the president's commission. Ms. Bucknell could furnish no information on the other publications obtained similar photographs. So the reason why I mentioned that is I'm coming across Life magazine's name fucking everywhere, and I don't know how powerful they are, obviously, on the basis of it's a different, Life magazine to me does not mean anything, but looking throughout this whole entire case, there's a bunch of stuff. So this second article right here is, it's this Polytechnic High School in Fort Worth. He said he advised the C.A. Thompson and the principal of Polytechnic High School. Miss Thompson furnished the following information on 2 different occasions to teachers at Polytech High School in general conversation. He did not seem to think that it should be kept secret, but did not want his name mentioned. Thompson has a son named Laird Thompson, who is a writer for Life magazine. He was in Los Angeles, California at the time of the assassination of the president. Life headquarters called him and had him go to Dallas immediately. After arriving in Dallas, Thompson wanted to find his wife and mother of Oswald. He paid some money to some Dallas policemen to obtain the address where their relatives were staying in Irving, Texas. He went to this address and did not find the mother, the wife, and 2 children of Oswald. He talked them into going with him and the photographer to the Adolphus Hotel in downtown Dallas. He and the photographer, with the mother, wife, and children, remained in this hotel for several hours. He received numerous phone calls in his room, and he would tell them that he was Joe Rubenstein, a shirt salesman, and that he would have the wrong room when persons called trying to locate these members of the family. The father said that the Secret Service or the FBI finally got to the Adolphus Hotel and took the mother, wife, and children away from his son. So that, I think, is valid only because when Ruth Payne made a statement saying she never contacted Marina Oswald after the incident and everything, and once they went their separate ways, that was it. Well, there's documents saying that Ruth Payne showed up to the house where Marina Oswald was being watched by Secret Service members, and they denied Marina did not want to see Ruth. So Ruth is lying right there by saying that. Whether she's covering up, I don't think she's Central Intelligence Agency, but I think she's just maybe hazy on the story. Sure, we can say that. Or she's just covering up for being maybe not a trustworthy person on some aspects of things. That aside, that Life magazine is involved again. But why is a Life magazine reporter being requested from Life magazine to go pick up the mother of Lee Oswald, the wife, and the children? That to me is a little bit sketchy, where I start questioning Life magazine a little bit more. Now, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a reporter, but I'm coming across documents and I'm trying to verify what the hell's true and what's propaganda, and what have I been told that most people agree on that could be also wrong, which is why I questioned the photograph that was in the shoe. Allegedly, when she got to a hotel, she ripped it up and flushed it down the toilet, but we know there was multiple copies of that photo. And we know that George de Mohrenschildt was one of these people that received this photograph, which is why I mentioned the Stovall Company stuff. If he was, Oswald was maybe messing around at work and put his face on this photo and showing it around like Hunter a fascist, that type thing, as like a bragging thing. And then that's why he was so quick to be able to point it out. But like I said, I don't know. I'm just asking questions here.
Yeah, Life magazine, there's files in the Blunt archives. There's the Richard Billings, and you've got Holland McCombs, and you've got what's that guy's name? Hugh Ainsworth. Especially Hugh Ainsworth is an incredibly dodgy character. He wanted to be an FBI informant, and he wanted to get in touch with Vincent Drain. He wanted to red out on Garrison during the investigation. The Life magazine itself was very busy trying to get hold of all the photographs that were taken. I've read quite a few contracts that were made. There were photos that were taken just around the assassination, and they were
buying up everything or trying to. They bought the Zapruder film.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were trying to buy up a lot of the photographs. They bought the Zapruder film. I think Orville Nix tried to sell him his film, and they lowballed him, and he ended up selling it to somebody else. But I think Life magazine back then they were huge. I mean, this was of course before computers, before the internet. You had a couple ways to get your news. That was from Walter Cronkite, Life magazine, or the newspaper. And these were huge publications with massive audiences. And I'm pretty sure the CIA would have had some kind of contact, if not direction, given to Life magazine, these major news corporations. I mean, the Mockingbird stuff that we read about was probably going on a lot earlier than we think it was, even back in 1963.
Life mag was very photography aimed, like, they weren't doing massive articles, so it had page after page filled with really good photography overall. So it was more picture based than text based. Let's look at it like that.
And they got busted. Reversing a couple images from the Zapruder film to make it appear, that Kennedy lurched forward after the shot instead of backwards, and this wasn't really exposed until the Zapruder film was shown to the public, and Life magazine got called out on the fact that they were flipping different frames from the Zapruder film to portray the Warren Commission narrative. And was it an accident? I doubt it.
No, it's not an accident, because I'll tell you what, if you check out the cover with the Robert Kennedy assassination, where Robert Kennedy is lying on the floor and he's held basically his hand up by
they took out the clip-on tie.
The clip-on tie has disappeared. It's gone. It's not suspicious, but there's a golden rule. You don't mess with news photographs. That's a golden rule. Even now, these days, I've seen photographers lose their jobs because they got rid of an element and they said, well, I did this for cosmetic or aesthetic reasons. No, it was in the picture. You should leave it in, and that's that.
Well, I met the one guy at the conference that we went to in 2014. He was also at Lancer in 2019. What's his name? James something. can't remember his last name, but he worked for Life magazine in 1963.
Oh, Wagensford.
Yeah, James Wagensford.
He died
And
very recently.
did he? Oh man, he was a great dude, fun to talk to, and he had some great stories. But you know, he was working for Life magazine in 1963, and he did attest to the fact that they would augment or manipulate photographs for the covers of these magazines to bring out the finer details that are lost in normal photography. And he said that they did do that, you know, with the famous Oswald backyard photograph cover. So, but exactly what they did, we don't know. You know, there's all kinds of things if you really want to get minute. You know, they say, you know, well, the sling is in a different spot, you know, or this, the scope's different, or there was no scope at all in the picture, and now there's a scope. You know, when you start analyzing all this stuff, who knows what the real story is? But you know, there was definitely some manipulation going on for sure.
I spoke on my show recently with someone who wrote books about the FBI invasion into Hollywood, the famous Hollywood 10. Basically, if you go to the FBI archives right now, you'll come across names like Walt Disney. You'll come across names like Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, a bunch of famous people. They had files that Hoover assigned agents to investigate these people by taking them out to dinner, following them around, work with them, become their best friend, don't let them know you're an agent, and to build up a file to see if they were communists. And a lot of this thing goes a little bit deeper than that, which is with Warner Brothers and these giant corporations that were making movies back then. If there was an actor that was going to portray an FBI agent, they couldn't have any scandals across them, nothing that would link back and make the FBI look bad. But also, if they swung a little bit left, so if that means if they went into something for Cuba, being an activist, they were not going to get their part in that film, whatever it was. If it was a military film, it doesn't even matter if there was one mention of it. And you just start realizing it's like, just because if your views, I think the whole Yankee Doodle Dandy, the guy who made that, he was being investigated by Hoover's administration. This is what someone told me. And he makes the Yankee Doodle Dandy thinking that, oh, they're going to think, there's no way I'm going to think I'm a communist now because I just made this thing that is very patriotic. And you just get into like, okay, well, if there's manipulation in our movies, when does it get to the manipulation of media? And it goes back to Life magazine. I mean, we know about there could have been witnesses that could have been questioned. Barry Ernst has the best example with the girl on the stairs. More than one person was on that staircase that should have been talked to, but wasn't. And you just get into this aspect of like, okay, maybe they were playing ball because they were getting better witnesses. They were getting whatever. But it also seems like they were in the pocket and they were trying to pitch the story for a main reason, which I don't think is a weird question to ask. And once you start knowing about the invasion into movies and all these things, there's scandals with Lyndon Johnson. Then immediately when he becomes president, all the scandals drop. I mean, that's kind of a little bit suspicious in its own as well, too. And you start realizing the trial by media, whether Oswald would have lived and gotten the trial or not. He
It was a
probably
trial by media. I mean, you see that with the access the press had. I mean, I have never seen a situation like this where the press is less than 20 feet away from where the actual main suspect is being interrogated. This is absolutely impossible. They have all access in that whole corridor. And then they even can bring their massive cameras. Now, these are cameras that are huge, huge cameras. They're almost the size of a small car on a tripod. And they are in that corridor, and they have the power lines run through the window downstairs, you know, from the third floor all the way down to generators or vans that are parked outside as such. I mean, trial by media, and everybody was flapping, just quacking about all kinds of stuff about Oswald. And they're all saying he's guilty and he's done this and he's done that. And they only come up with specific bits of evidence. And then later on, you find out it's all rubbish. Great example, Henry Wade, the district attorney, says the cab driver is called Daryl Click. And then they go to Henry and go, Henry, what's that about? Oh, I don't know. I couldn't think of a name, so I just called him like that. So it's just total fakery. And the same goes with, you know, I mean, Oswald himself on the 22nd. Oh, God, he's flapping to the press like there's no tomorrow. You know, I don't have a lawyer and I don't know what this is about and blah, blah, blah. And then on the 23rd, they're trying to move him through the corridor as quickly as possible. Because what I did by the chronology is that on the 23rd, everything is done real quick, and he doesn't get much time to talk about it. I mean, the only time is that he hasn't been able to have a shower, and he denies the charges. That's on another one, but you can see how forceful they actually move him through that corridor and through that door into the elevator to go back to jail. Whereas before that, the corridor is so filled up. There's even a point where Oswald just waits patiently, doesn't even talk. But the coppers are going, yo, man, get rid of it. These people, we need to get through this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. Bill Alexander couldn't keep his mouth shut. That was the assistant DA. Was also flapping like Niagara Falls, couldn't shut up. And there's several instances. Will Fritz, same thing, having a little quiet chat. Yeah, this is our guy, blah, blah, blah. Really? Oh, right. Okay. So, and this is how opinion is formed. And everybody just takes it as gospel. This is also why all the documents are hidden, why they were hidden for such a long time. That's the reason why. Because if people start to read this, they'd say, right, that Warren Commission report is a load of rubbish. Because there's much more to it than what they claim to be.
Well, it's funny if you say that the Warren Commission's rubbish, people say, oh, that's always what CT is, or that's always what that is. But I'm like, if you read the Warren Commission, it reads like Oswald did it, and we're going to show you how. And I can just give you just two examples. The rifle that they said Marina was able to identify. Well, the HSCA found that she didn't know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. I had pulled that up with Gerald Posner on air and showed that. And then there's another one as well, too, about recounting for the loading on the back porch of the rifle. She didn't care what he was doing. It was the most dysfunctional relationship I have ever seen. Most people would have separated at this point, but they were still together. She didn't care what he was doing with the rifle, didn't even think to ask questions. That's in the HSCA Volume 2. Another thing is Jack Ruby. In the Warren Commission, it says Jack Ruby's heart goes out to Jackie Kennedy. Well, we know that was just a makeup thing that his lawyer made to get him a lesser sentence. So that was printed in the Warren Commission like it's fact. It's not fact. And I'm sure you guys have came across plenty of other stuff about the Warren Commission.
Oh, God, that's the thing with the documentation. We've got millions of pages. Well, those millions of pages weren't processed properly. I mean, think about the Warren Report. The Warren Report was out 10 months after the act, end of September, I think. And the assassination being November 22nd. What investigation is of that kind of magnitude is finished and stamped in 10 months?
And printed.
Which investigation was that? The ones that you want to close real quick. That's it. That's not conspiratorial drivel. That's just fact. It's fact.
They had a 2-hour documentary that was released right when the Warren Commission came out before the volumes, right?
Yeah. On the news, yeah.
That's kind of suspicious.
No, yeah, you know what? It's incredible how fast certain things happen. I mean, bureaucracy is a bloated pig. That is just what it is. And there's all kinds of people who want their say in it, and et cetera, et cetera. But all of a sudden, everyone's ship is sailing in the same direction, miraculously. But the documents, they're going to be hidden because we don't want you to read that. Not in our lifetime. I
was reading an article this morning about the HSCA investigation, and they were saying, Blakey was saying that they have over 800 file boxes. They would fit in a certain size room, 20 to 30 feet deep, and that they're going to be classified for the next 50 years, which is automatically done for a house investigation, no matter what it is. And it's crazy that there are still, thank God for the JFK Act in 1991. It did release a lot of these documents ahead of time. And if we hadn't had that, we wouldn't have nearly what we have now. It would have been purely FOIA request if we could get what we could get. they were supposed to be classified from the HSCA for 50 years after in 1978. So that would put us getting those documents
2028.
Yeah, we wouldn't even have half of them yet, and a lot of them we still don't have. They're still classified. Like the HSCA interview of Will Fritz is still classified.
I've got that.
I've got that. Do you have it?
Yeah.
Do you?
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Oh, goddamn! You're holding out on me, Bart.
A lot of people say, you know what? It was easy. It was, Oswald did it, this, that, and the other. Why are you writing millions of pages on it? Why? Why do you lock all that stuff up? Why? There's no reason for that. If it's so crystal clear, if it's so easily done, why is that hidden for decades? And why people have to struggle? I mean, I don't have so much an issue with the documentation that's still people waiting for, because most of it is related to the Central Intelligence Agency, and whether that has anything to do with the actual assassination as such. I'm interested, but I don't know how much relevance that has. I've got more issues with the documentation that disappeared that did have relevance to Oswald. Coast Guard stuff, for instance. We should think Coast Guard.
Wait, didn't Angleton take a file on Oswald as well too, or is that made up?
Yeah, Angleton has involvement when it comes to records keeping behind and not sharing them. Yeah. Malcom knows that. Malcom knows that.
Back then,
Yeah, but I mean, there's, this, when you look at all the records, and then you start, and Malcom basically started getting finder's aids and documents that say, well, we destroyed this as per agency regulations or blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, hold on a minute. This is about the most important thing that happened in American history in the last, since the Second World War. And yet you're destroying this stuff. And I'm thinking, nah. And then also the commissions, and the Secret Service even took the piss even more. That's a British expression, but they're just made a fool of everyone by basically, even after they were told by the ARB, do not destroy those records. They actually destroyed the records in the mid-90s or 96 and just went, oh, we're destroyed. That whole situation with Trump and all that, with grabbing and this, that, and the other, that's like a repeat, in a rough sense when it comes to comparison. And all these text messages that started to disappear all of a sudden. All that is exactly the same principle as what they were told to keep the stuff, not get rid of it. And yet they did. Just complete disregard of whatever regulation was said to them. They basically got rid of it. So,
well,
what are you going to do?
Another important part about the assassination that I think you guys probably don't dive into as much, but where I've kind of always had a little fascination about just because of Operation Midnight Climax, but it's MK Ultra. Like, that was a conspiracy for the longest time. And if you just Google MK Ultra right now or MK Ultra survivors, you're going to see Montreal 2020, Montreal 2018 survivors suing the government, trying to get compensation for the damage that was done to them over psychological experiments. We only know MK Ultra exists because, thank God for the government, for every document that they have, there's like 4 copies of it. So trying to destroy them all is a little bit hard. And they had a bunch in a warehouse that a whistleblower exposed. And we know about as much as that. And we know that Julian West, who was the therapist for Jack Ruby before he went crazy, is also tied into that. I don't think, like, the whole MK Ultra stuff, just real quick, is it was supposed to create like these Manchurian candidates, these things. They said it failed. That's 100% true. It did. Because if you read the documents, if you follow the trail of it, it ends up turning into using drugs to just shatter someone's mind and make them crazy. And it's not trying to create an agent anymore, because they couldn't master that in a successful experiment. So it just became making people go crazy. That's why you have the Schreiker incident where he went nuts and killed a 3-year-old girl after he raped her, and he worked for the military and he was being treated for headaches. Like, there's all this weird stuff that seems like this is the failed experiment. It was, because it was just to make people go crazy eventually. Manson's a big example where you have issues with Bugliosi as well.
If it was successful, they'd still be doing it these days. That's a great parameter. If that was a successful experiment, then 50 years later, yeah, we're still going strong, baby. But that's not the case. So,
But we wouldn't have had those documents for 80 or 90 years. Even when I went to the CIA website and looked up Joylon West, who was the guy for Ruby, they had no files on him. But if you Google his name, it says worked for the CIA. So they have no files on this guy. But I found a file, Jack Ruby psychiatric records, and he's stamped at the bottom right of every. So he does exist. But we wouldn't know that unless that whistleblower came out. And you just start wondering when they say we're keeping documents because it's national security. That is a very, what are they covering? And you get into this aspect where I think every researcher has kind of said it's why they also are multi-researched on JFK, RFK, and MLK, because they always say if you solve the JFK one, you'll start seeing notes of the other stuff. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, it makes a little bit more sense why you would keep more documents unlocked. I mean, what else could they really be hiding? I don't think there's a smoking gun document in there.
Well, you should be glad that you can look it up. You know, that's one thing, because many other governments just keep that stuff locked up. If I'm not British, but I live in England, and there's stuff that's still under lock and key from the First World War, because some rich lord, his son, did something stupid during the First World War, blah blah blah, and that's written up about, and basically drags that name through the mud. Now, of course, it wants to prevent that from ever getting released as such. So they basically hide that in the archives. There's no way to get hold of it because he's got some powerful pals who basically put a lid on the whole thing. In America, at least, you can go to the archives and basically go through that. But I'm going to be honest about it. Most people don't have the patience or lack the will of doing as such. And basically doing that. And that's why Malcom Blunt, I mean, think about Malcolm. Malcolm is nuts in his own way, nuts being, in the sense that he lived less than a mile away from the archives and spent 6 months in the country and basically went there 5-6 days a week to go to the archives and just started Xeroxing all these documents as such. And I've basically had the honor and the pleasure to digitize them all, as such. And that's, I mean, Jim Eugenio called him the researcher's researcher. I find that a little bit of a strange title, but it also points to the fact that a lot of people that call themselves researcher maybe have only spent one day at the archives as such. These days, it's easier because if you have the RIF number and you know about it, you can email them and say, listen, can I get this document, that document? You can get a whole set. I think it's 50 or 100 pages for free, right? And and others are going to the archives and basically go through boxes, basically, because that works faster as such. I am going to do it one day. As soon as if I go to the States, Washington will be my first stop probably, because I want to experience the frustration of having to go through that crap at the archives, because it's a really slow and laborious process of getting maybe a dozen or 15 boxes. And then, that will have to keep you busy for the rest of the day because they're not going back out there again, this, that, and the other. And the indexing system is, you go with a RIF number, and with that RIF number, they have to go through their own system to find out where that particular document or box is as such. And they bring down these boxes. And Malcolm has said already that back then it was much more, you could have 24 boxes and now you can only get 12 or something like that. It's like half of what it used to be and things like that. It's much more difficult and slower process. And I had a friend of mine, Terry Martin, who is one of our RKC, and he tried to go through it for me. And he went there 3 or 4 times as well and called it a crock of shit because it was just absolutely mega frustrating to deal with these people. And because of the system they have over there. So, yeah. But at least you can do that.
And look, Robbie, you and we live relatively close to each other, within an hour and a half of DC, and in these national archives and College Park, where they're located and all that. And I've never been there. I don't have the time or the patience. I mean, I could go there, but I just don't want to go through all the bullshit attached to it. To be able to find what I'm looking for and have the time to make sure that I do everything right, go through all the processes and this, that, and the other. And, thank God for Malcolm and Bart and people like them that have taken the time to do that and share what they found and make it public. A lot of these guys, they'll go there and go through this stuff and keep it for themselves and not share it. And I think it's great what Malcolm and Bart are doing, and others, But yeah, it's brutal. So Bart, whenever you come to DC, give us a holler, man. We'll meet you in College Park.
I think with a certain number of evidence, like I go by the document. Like if somebody says something, I'd like to see the document just to be able to verify that. And that's kind of what I'm trying to go by. But also conversation's a little bit different when you're doing it on a podcast. Like if someone tells you something, you just got to verify that later. At least that's what I've learned to start doing, especially when I'm talking to someone. I don't want to, check them right in real time. I just feel like that's kind of rude. But I do think there is a certain amount where you're allowed to a little bit of speculation. And the example I would say is when Johnson was getting sworn in and he waited for Air Force One to fly off until he got sworn in. The president's dead. You're already president. You don't need the official thing. But he pulled Jackie Kennedy from the back, still wearing the bloody dress, and then gives a wink. And there's a famous photo of that. That's speculation that I'm like, okay, it's easy and it's right to speculate that guy's a piece of shit.
That was bad manners. That, to me, that's bad manners. That wink of like, you got the power now, you've got the presidential seal. That's not, to me, like the plan worked and this, that, and the other. That's just make believe. But it was bad manners. It was bad etiquette. That's the way I look at it. I mean,
I've said multiple times I don't think Johnson was in charge of that. You wouldn't sit your car right behind somebody to do that. I think eventually they found out what happened and they probably covered it up a little bit. Same thing with Hoover. But I mean, that's just my own thoughts from just looking through it and kind of seeing it from documents. And because I mean, it's weird. You see the Katzenbach memo and then you see Hoover. You talked about it, Bart. They already said we got the killer of the president like the day of, like there was no thorough investigation. There was no looking through evidence and basing it. And that's why the Warren Commission reads like Oswald did it. We're going to show you how.
The first document that came from Hoover was dated the 22nd and it was 3 p.m. Now, Bookout and Hosty didn't join Fritz until 3:15. So 15 minutes before the actual interrogation starts, although I've got suspicions that Fritz was already talking to him for at least half an hour before the FBI arrived. Basically, that I find that really weird, just odd, at least, from a timing perspective. I mean, Fritz hadn't really done the investigation or the interrogation as such. And Hoover already says at that point, oh, I think we got our man as such. And then the follow-up documents, which is another document to an assistant DA. And then also with the Katzenbach memo, which is 4:15. That's like, I mean, I know they've got to keep the machinery going. That's another element. A lot of people forget and go, well, they're really quick. Well, you know what? Even though that either he was loved or hated, I'm not getting into that debate about JFK. The machine needs to keep going because a lot heavier stuff is at stake at that point. The stock market, world economy, are the Russians coming? Are the Cubans coming? All that stuff is happening there and then. So I can understand that there is a drive to get a guilty party, but at the same time, the jet fighter speed basically of at 3:00 already declaring someone guilty when he hasn't even been officially interrogated yet by the FBI agents who actually recorded stuff as such. Now that's really questionable as far as I'm concerned. And the same thing goes to the Heidel ID. Also, it's very questionable.
Even when we talk about him being a patsy and people say that's nonsense or that's nothing, it's like, but we see that now. We saw with Abraham Bolden as well, too, getting locked up for trumped up charges. I think he was the one that had a high counterfeit record or something like that. He was being able to detect a bunch of counterfeits that were going on. And he was making notes about the Secret Service in their comments, mostly being intoxicated, drinking, and not being in correct conditions. And then he gets locked up on trumped up charges. And then recently Biden pardoned him. I mean, wrongfully imprisoned for just simple stuff. We know that happens today. There's a big issue with that. That's why there's the Innocence Project. But whenever you say Oswald was being blamed for this or he was a patsy, people can't get there. I mean, people can get to the point of so many assassination attempts on Castro, but then you say they use the regime change strategy on your own president. People go, oh, that's nonsense. It's like, well, why is it so easy for us to believe that another country would have a strategy like that, but when it's us, it's not true? It's just like there's this weird, like, it's double standard that I'm not really understanding a whole lot either. I mean, I get it, like, where's the smoking gun document? But like, just like with MK Ultra, there's no documentation of saying it was effective, but we have plenty of accounts and the government has paid settlements to people about it. We have those, but I don't think you're going to find a document that says, yeah, the CIA killed the government or killed JFK. You're not going to get that. It's not going to happen. But there's plenty of things that can suggest, or it was individual actors. I mean, you can get there with the mafia aspect. There's a weight to a lot of these things. But the one thing for me is like, even if I don't think it's a lone gunman, but even if Oswald was up there, someone took another shot. And that's why I listened to the acoustical evidence guy and I tried to understand it. I don't buy it, but he's in the same fight that there was more than one shooter. And I think with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, their money running out of funding, that wasn't just an accident. That was just because they didn't want to fund it. And there's this aspect of like where it starts to drop dead. You're not given the resources to be able to do your research anymore. I mean, that's not crazy to say. I think that's pretty logical when you're looking at it.
The HSCA is a bit of a funny thing, because from my point of view, and especially when it comes to Dallas, the investigations, what they did was just check whether their statements were actually true. They should have been much more on it when it comes to investigating it. And what they did was that, even though with their limited funds, they were too far spread out. And that's the mistake of the HSCA. Forget all this agency stuff or who the shooter is, this, that, and the other. How are you going to find out the shooter? If you haven't found him after 60 seconds, you're not going to find the shooter. Simple as that. And they didn't. But what they could have done is go through the Dallas procedures and what Dallas did and how they did it and where, and this, that, and the other. And because I've said this before, you need to go to the core of what's happening. And that's why I do Prayer Man, because if Prayer Man is Oswald, which I think he is, but if he is, and the entire deck of cards falls down, then you got a massive problem. I mean, you take the head of the snake off, and then you've got every agency, every group, every person at that time would have been well scared, because it would have meant like, well, if Oswald didn't do it, who did? And now it doesn't really matter if Prayer Man is Oswald or not. It doesn't matter, because almost everyone's dead anyway. Okay, the only one that I know that was deeply involved with that whole thing, that's still alive, is Elmer Boyd. He's 93 or 94, and he's still alive. And he keeps storm. He's the old guard, and he doesn't talk about this stuff. I saw a few interviews of him, and he's really good in circumventing, answering the real questions as such. And that's what the HSCA should have done. They should have gone into Dallas and also admit that the social economics settings at that time, which hadn't changed much during the HSCA, so that's probably why they didn't do it, about the whole racist background of the South and the fact that a lot of coppers were just bent. It was corrupt as hell. And I mean, I'll give you another good example. Jack Ruby. Everybody during that whole Warren Commission thing, they all going, oh no, I didn't know him, I didn't hang out with him. Practically the entire force knew Jack Ruby, because he waltzed in there with donuts and just kept everybody, gave him free passes to come into his club and so forth. He knew everyone.
Well, even when he shot Oswald, the guy said, Jack, you son of a bitch. Like, you didn't call him Mr. Ruby. You were on a first name basis. And, he said it pretty instinctively instead of being just shot.
And he got in there. Oh, how did he get in there? Well, we don't know. Well, we think so. They're trying to get the guy, I forgot his name, the police officer who's standing on the ramp and who was not supposed to let anyone in. And they tried to blackball him big time within the DPD. And he went, no way, nobody came through. Now, whether that's true or not, don't know. But somehow Ruby managed to get in there. Ruby is seen during the press conference Ruby is also seen in an elevator when what's his name, the gunsmith who needed to check out the rifle. He recognized Ruby, and they were in the elevator going down to the parking garage. He was everywhere. He just could walk around freely. So yeah, it's the way it is. And that, all that, those elements, which are important elements, because that would put a lot of questions to the DPD. Like, what did you do? What happened? How come this guy walks in there and does all this? And reports being disappeared and all that, whole bunch of guys got arrested on that day as well. The reports about that, where is it? Nowhere. Nobody knows. C.W. Brown had a really good suspect as well. I forgot his name. There's a report about it. Disappeared, all gone. There's all kinds of funny things from that day, funny things that basically just all evaporated as such. But this whole Ruby thing, yeah, that's just mad. And they got away with it. And the agency was just basically too widespread and started all this investigating about the Cubans and New Orleans and all that. And you know what? Don't get me wrong. I love reading about it. It's interesting as hell, but it doesn't solve anything of the case. Because if you think like, it's like the Clay Shaw case. He may have been involved or not, because he knew that he'd been witnessed and shown, he'd been seen with Ferry and with Oswald in Clinton, Louisiana. But does that actually, what does that actually mean? What, he was involved in the planning? What, because one person said so? It's not good enough. And the answers lie there. And that's why I do Prayer Man. I don't care about the autopsy and, all the witnesses that are outside and this, that, and the other, because it doesn't get you anywhere. It just gives you more fuel for speculation. Whereas if you've gone again through the documents that are left over, that example I gave you in my first talk about the frisking of Oswald. Oswald gets frisked by two guys from the 5 arresting officers. And then he gets frisked again. And lo and behold, they find his bus ticket and they find 5 or 6 bullets in his pocket. How the hell is that possible? Nobody questions that. And this is where I get, but these are the important things. Because, either those two the first two are lying, Bentley and Walker are lying, or the stuff's basically put in his pocket as such. And there are questions, legitimate questions about the bus ride and the cab ride. Yeah. And really serious, legitimate questions because of the statements that were given as such. The paperwork just doesn't match with what the story is supposed to say.
And if I'm not mistaken, when they were given statements, nobody mentioned the AJ Heidel ID either.
Yeah, that's true. The Heidel ID is not mentioned at all until the next morning, 11:30. And the Heidel ID is only brought up in FBI documentation because Colonel Robert E. Jones of the 112th Military Intelligence Group says so. But closer inspection says that there was no mention of a Heidel ID. And that particular ID is not coming forward until November the 23rd. But loads of people have seen the evidence laid out as such. Bookhout, Hosty. And Hosty even made notes. He's sitting there in that room next door. I think it's Billy Senkel's office. And he next to Fritz's office on the left. And, nobody makes mention of it until the next morning. Manning Clements just put up a report and go, oh, yeah, yesterday. Oh, yeah, I was in the office and I found his ID and Bookhout was with me. If Bookhout was with him, why didn't he mention that during any interrogation to Fritz and say, listen, this guy's got another ID. What's up with that? No, we're not mentioning that. Not until the next morning, 11:30. And that's after the rifle is found. You can't make that shit up. And that's why they should have investigated. They should have gone much deeper because the paperwork was there. That's the thing. It was not hidden for the HSCA. They could look at that stuff. They could see these documents. And the same with the FBI documents and the Dallas police documents. And they didn't do that. Instead of that, they just waltz on about all kinds of other stuff. And, here as a researcher, in my entire lifetime, I will not be able to go through all the material. And even if I have a team of 5 or 10, I don't know, I will not be able to go through all that material. And then I'm talking about the agency and the Secret Service, etc., 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 because there's so much stuff there. And that's why also everybody says, certain people have said, you need to take one subject and you need to research the hell out of it, because then you make more progress because of that bit. And that's why I decided, you know what, for me, what matters is where was Oswald at that time? What was he doing? What was he doing in the morning? What did he do after? And what happened in the interrogation and so forth? And that by myself, I mean, I've already spent years on this. I mean, I've already been at this since 2015. Seriously. Before that, I was just doing it in a generic way.
Did they find him at the theater first and arrest him, or did they find his rifle first?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because I've heard people say that they went to the Payne's house and went right directly to that garage and grabbed that blanket, and that's when Miss Payne was
no,
like,
the rifle, the blanket was the next day. Gus Rose went back in there for the second time, and that's when they found the blanket. And they said, like, yeah, you could see the imprint of the rifle in the blanket. Get the fuck out of here. My God. I mean, you can't make that shit up, but obviously they did. The imprint of the rifle was still in there in a blanket. The rifle found in the TSBD, I think it was done roughly around the same time when Oswald was arrested. Roughly, yeah.
well, everyone but Craig changed his statement.
Sorry, Rob?
I was gonna say, yeah, if not a little before. I think he was arrested at about quarter to 3.
Oh, right. Well, that's after then, because Oswald got arrested at 10 to 2.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a thing. It takes him 2 hours to find that damn thing.
Well, everyone that saw the rifle, Fritz and Craig and everybody, all made statements that it was a Mauser. And I get it if it was a mistake, but the serial code is marked on a different place than when it's on the Manly Car Carcano. And also the fact that Fritz changes his story and says that Roger Craig was never in that room when he was doing the interrogation, but Craig claims he did.
Fritz was a filthy liar.
Well, that's the thing.
Absolutely.
Is that Craig's the one that's now labeled as a liar. Everyone says that Craig, you can't trust his testimony. And I'm like, well, he stayed consistent all the way through. He might have mistakenly in 2 different interviews said that the color of the Rambler was a different one. I think he went from white to a different thing. But he's been overall claiming that was a Mauser that they found, not a Manly Car Carcano, and it makes sense. But I mean, do I admit a slip up when it comes to that? Do I say, okay, maybe they mistakenly did that? But then when do I stop giving them leniency on their mistakes? Because there was a lot of that. Apparently, someone that looked like Fritz was also using his name walking around Jack Ruby's strip club trying to ask questions. And you just get to this point, like, okay, so you got people saying that Jack Ruby is hanging out with their cops at Jack Ruby's club. Okay, well, they said that wasn't true. Well, we know that's got to be a lie at some point. You got a bunch of people stating that but then people stated Oswald was there as well, too.
Yeah, that one picture. Yeah. You know what? Back then, this is another thing a lot of people don't get. Back then, they had 2 haircuts. That was it. Everyone had clippered hair, like this kind of haircut. Probably get you in jail right there and then, right away. Oh, you're a vagrant, or you just kind of some subversive. You come with us, Sonny.
It's just you and Daryl Wayne Garner had that haircut. There you go.
If I look at the Newmans, what's his name? His first name. The ones that lay on the floor with the 2 kids on the grass. If I look at him, and if he were running, I would say that looks like Oswald. Same haircut, facial features, yeah, just like that. And a lot of people looked like Lee Oswald at that time.
Yeah, like Larry Crayford looked like Lee Oswald.
Yeah.
Neil Frazier looked in a way like Lee Oswald. Michael Payne looked like Lee Oswald.
Exactly. It's just, back then things were less complicated, and people were, and when somebody
suits, their hair back,
and you know what, you look at the prints, photographs being reprinted in newspapers, the quality of it Yeah, it's not digital where everything looks, where I can see every little hair and all that. The printing was atrocious, the quality of it. These are all factors, they're all disregarded.
Can I just bring up, this might be, maybe it's a dumb question to ask, but did you ever wonder why they printed Lee Harvey Oswald whenever they mentioned Lee Oswald? Like, what I heard was that they were reading off of arrest records, and that's how they do it, is that when media reads it, they're from a record like that. The police records will say the middle name. They still do that today. But what you didn't notice is when there's the mafia connections and all this, they state the first and last name of these mafia people. They never state the middle name, but they state the middle name when it comes to Lee Harvey Oswald, which means the media was basically copying down exactly what the arrest records and the police reports were saying rather than doing journalism. So they were just pitching the narrative. But then you're not going to have arrest records, a lot of them, on a lot of these mafia guys, especially if they're connected with the CIA or they're working with them, or there's just that corruption aspect of Dallas police. And that's why whenever you Google these people's names, there's a first and last, there's never a middle name, but you have a middle name for Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was a lot of it is used with assassins or accused assassins, and that's basically to pinpoint as best as the media can that individual, as opposed to any other individual that might share that name. For instance, if if Robert Clark, that's me, right? If I'm accused of killing Joe Biden, okay, and the media goes on and say, hey, Robert Clark was arrested today for shooting Joe Biden. Everybody that knows a Robert Clark would be like, oh shit, well, maybe it's the guy I know. But if you want to clarify, that it's Robert Beauregard, which is not my real middle name, Clark, that narrows it down a hell of a lot more than just a vague two-name reference. You know what I mean? And I think that's why the media does it with very high-profile killers or accused killers, because you hear it a lot with serial killers, John Wayne Gacy, Lee Harvey. You hear it a lot with those very high-profile accused killers, serial killers, assassins. At least not so much with the mafia. I mean, you don't have to
Charles
really
Manson.
pinpoint. Well, yeah, that's a good one. I don't know his middle name.
O.J. Simpson. Where's the middle name?
Orange Juice Simpson.
Al Capone, for Christ's sake, or Costello. I mean,
that's an interesting question, Robbie. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, that's an American thing where I just don't know enough about.
Yeah, I think it's more just to pinpoint as much as they can when they're reporting on things. To just narrow it down as much as they can without throwing a generic, hey.
Having said that, Oswald's name wasn't shared over the police radio when they were looking for him. They just had a suspect, and they just gave his height, his age, which was 6 years out, and his weight, which was also a bit out, and his height was a bit out. But especially the age, because they said he was 30 years old. But never mentioned his name. Yet, just before, and I mean just before, the cops are going into the Texas Theater, Charles Douglas Gibbons' name is broadcast, because Gibbons also wasn't present at the Texas School Book Depository when they were trying to see and account the people for their names as such. Now, they could have easily given Oswald's name, but he wasn't really missing, because you know why? Because there's the Revel list. And the Revel list is a list of people that were present in the Texas School Book Depository when the cops came in there and said, if you want to leave, you need to leave your name, your phone number, your address, your details, this, that, and the other. And there's this list. And Oswald's name is on the top of that list, right there and then. So, but he was the first one that left the Texas School Book Depository. Now, if they were looking for him, yeah, they would have mentioned his name right there and then, because they had it. But they didn't. But then they do give Charles Douglas Gibbons' name out. And, that's another one of these anomalies where you just go, that's just fishy.
Well, he's a black guy, and he's got a prior record.
Yeah, he got caught with 2 ounces of weed, no less, in those days. So yeah, yeah. So, but it's just weird. You just can't put 2 and 2 together when it comes to that. When the names are coming out as such. Yeah, really strange. That's a good point of view about the criminal record as such. Yeah. So, what's next, Robbie?
That's all. I'm stumped right now. I'm trying to think this all through because I'm trying to, like I said, I'm trying to get a better grasp on who Oswald is. But I mean, you have so many people turn around on their stories now. Even Frazier, I mean, it seems like now it's just a publicity thing. Even trying to get him or talk to him about anything, it just wouldn't be a true testimony. Much like you can't really trust Marina's testimony either. And that's my whole thing. Is like I'm not choosing a side here, CT or Lone Nut, but when someone's statement like that is so flimsy and it's so back and forth, you just have to throw it out in general. It doesn't matter if it fits your side anymore. If they're batting from your team, they're just not trustworthy. Whether it's hard to know. I mean, Clint Hill apparently changed his whole thing as well, too. After he's been saying there's a back hole in the back of Kennedy's head, he's completely changed his statement now because he's making another book. I think Vince talked about that. And it's just you get into this aspect of, okay, so is the truth just that's just gone? Is it just dust in the wind? And you start trying to, like, that's why I'm so interested in Kennedy's policy. I'm not even 100% in as much as I was maybe a month ago to the assassination. I'm learning about, I mean, Cuba was obviously a battleground with Dulles and JFK, but then there was Vietnam. Okay. Well, then there's the one that no one really talks about, and that's Indonesia, a gold company that was semi-owned by Allen Dulles. And that's another issue where you're stepping on a person's business. Now, if you can get to the point where, Google and all these big corporations have a lot of influence in media and other things now, take that from a smaller scale. Individuals that have, overseas, like Nancy Pelosi talking about insider trading. She didn't want to ban insider trading because she's insider trading. Like that's happening today. But then you got other aspects where you have Allen Dulles back in 1963. He owns a bunch of companies, a lot of profits in Cuba, a lot of business aspects. What's easier, to stay there or protect your stuff or lose it? Because when I looked at Kennedy beating Nixon in the election, I think they were ready for Nixon to take over. Everything was primed for him to go because they thought Nixon was going to win. And then Kennedy wins. And then, I mean, Nixon eventually gets in office later after Johnson and everything. But that was, I guess his Nixon's policies or just Nixon's attitude was more in line with how the government had been going and how it's kind of been built. That's why there's this aspect of plausible deniability. Allen Dulles and all the CIA didn't need to tell JFK what was going on in Cuba because he didn't need to know. It's plausible deniability. Well, it's because they also wouldn't have agreed with it. And that's where you have the Bay of Pigs thing as well, too. Supplying air support and him denying that and then taking the rap for it, saying he's the respectable person in charge. And I think from the policies, it brings a lot of good evidence to show that it's this idea of like switching a regime change to Kennedy is not really difficult. It's more on the aspect of like business and a bunch of other things. I mean, looking soft on
it's
Russia.
Always about money.
Well, looking soft on communism. So if you can say that, it's always about money. That works today as well too. But when you
read Smedley Butler's thing, it's a really thin little book. And Smedley Butler was a general during the First World War, and then he talks about tank division getting sent leather saddles that are meant for horses instead of being for tanks, and just the whole thing about the money. You see that with what's his name, Dick Cheney's company he used to work at, who was supplying everything for Iraq. Bag of laundry costs $100. Now you can't go to some Iraqi woman basically saying, "Listen, here's $10. Wash my clothes," as such. No. It needs to be done through the army, and you'll have to pay $100, and the army is charged $100 as such. That's how it works. War is about money. As simple as that. Nothing else. Huge amounts of money. That's how it works. And every time there's a different excuse to be found, or there's a plane going into the towers, or the Gulf of Tonkin, or and all this. And every time, well, I wouldn't say about the towers, but the Gulf of Tonkin was just made up. The whole thing was just a joke, and it was just an excuse to go to war with Vietnam. They just needed an excuse to do this thing. Of course, everything was already built up as such, but we need something so we can declare war as such. I mean, what does Putin say? we're going to get rid of some Nazis in Ukraine. All right. How's that going for you right now? So, but, you know, that's how it works. It's just business on a large scale, and it goes at the expense of a lot of innocent people. So how it goes. Always has been like that. Money. Every time. Same thing. Always about money. It's just a small
It's the way of
group.
the world.
Yeah, and he gets shitloads of money for which they buy themselves more influence and just think of the next thing. You know, so.
Well, I also would put the fear of communism. I think you guys know from looking through documents how much of that, oh, we can't let there be any more than one. Like it was the public must be satisfied that there was one lone assassin because you can't let there be conspiracy because of that fear of communism. And they're ramping up the ball at this point. And I think that's a good idea for like, okay, put more money in the military because we got to worry about Russia and all this. I mean, I think when I was talking to Greg Polgrain, he was mentioning about Indonesia, and he goes, "Yeah, they didn't even think about another communism. When they said there's communists over there, nobody thought there's another version of communism, and that was the one that they were dealing with Indonesia." And I had the public question a little bit more, but they were rolling the ball. The media was, everybody was, and then Kennedy gets killed, and they're like, "Hold on." Everyone's so ramped up about communism, they're going to think, okay, now we got to go to war with Cuba or Russia. I mean, Operation Northwoods, you guys know about that. They had the same thing if the Apollo rocket blew up. They were going to blame that on Cuba. So you just get into the aspect of like they were willing to go to war on their terms, but if then this happened, so if you get into the aspect that there was someone, maybe it wasn't the government that did it. They had to stop the ball though because they can't go to war. And then you have where Randy Benson talked about looking at the flight records for the Air Force and the protocols for a procedure, whatever action that they would do were taken off the board, which has never happened before. So, I mean, there's just like what I'm saying is there's reasonable, weird stuff to question. And I think, you know, looking through documents, you could put the weight of communism being in there as well, too. I mean, the whole blame and getting wrapped, it makes, I mean, that's understandable, but I just don't think one person should continue to pay the price through history on it.
Well, I mean, you know, but this is how it works. It's what Americans would call growth. That's what it is. Nothing else. Yeah. And you may think that's funny, and it is funny in a way. I'll make that up. But Iraq, for instance, who paid the price for that bullshit? Weapons of mass destruction. No one. Did anyone get nailed for that? For bullshitting their way through the weapons of mass destruction? Nobody. They made a fuckload of money. So? Latin America? So what? We're selling planes, missiles, whatever. All goes there. What do you think about this whole Ukraine thing? It's done through telling the story to helping them out, this, that, and the other. And it almost rings true, almost. Because I'd like to know, you know, they've given them roughly now about $15 billion on military aid. But what do you get in return for that? They'll probably get double or treble or maybe quadrupled in return for that, one way or another.
I have a
They get all the
controversial
influence they have.
I have a
in
controversial
Ukraine.
take on Ukraine. I just
Yeah, well, I mean,
our media was shitting on them for months before that even happened. Then they immediately turned around and went the complete opposite direction. And then they expect you to buy it that they're, oh my God, we're so sorry for them. It's like you were shitting on them the whole entire time before this even occurred. I mean, it's a horrible situation, obviously, but the media is acting like, oh, we always cared. It's like, no,
the media is not to blame ever. You know what? If say, let's just have a hypothetical thing here. Say that prayer man is Oswald. Let's just
I don't buy the prayer man thing.
tough. Anyway, if Oswald is
It's a
prayer
woman.
man, what's that?
It's a woman, right?
Yeah, a 350-pound one who is wearing
Yes.
a wig for professional reasons. Okay, so
There you
she's
go.
blonde.
I
And
just
she
want to
looks-
focus into Kennedy's policies. I don't want to worry about this.
But no, say that's the case, then that would basically, so prayer man being Oswald, then that would basically put also a negative point on the mainstream media press, because the mainstream media press, when it comes to the JFK assassination, has, as we say in Holland, that's pretending that their nose was bleeding and they were just like, yeah, looking away, or just not helping, or hoarding material. Great example is Time Life and the Zapruder film, for instance. Yeah. I mean, if Robert Groden hadn't done that, then that film would still be in a box somewhere, gathering dust in a basement. And they still do that with some of the films. NBC, for instance, when it comes to the Darnell film and the Beekman film.
Rob, let me get
They were complicit. So
let me get your opinion on this. What, since from doing your show and starting from the beginning to where you're at now, I mean, are you just dive deep like I am right now, or you just like I do it because I'm just addicted to the whole. Honestly, this part of history. Now I'm gonna try and leak into. I got a couple episodes that are actually just probably came out, which are about the Nixon tapes. Just diving into Nixon's administration. I'm just getting a different understanding of history now through all this, even the depression and all that. I'm just curious too. You do more JFK focused than I do. I'm just interested in. I mean, are you addicted to it? I mean, are you trying to get answers out of it, or you're just trying to learn all you can about this part of history?
Well, I think I must have been a cat in a previous life. I'm just curious. Like it's interesting to me to try to figure all this stuff out. Am I addicted? No. I walk away tomorrow and never think about the shit again and be just fine. I've walked away at certain points and just taken months of breaks and then, slowly gotten back into it. I think every now and then you get burnt out from looking into the shit so deep, so often that you just need to take a break for your own mental sanity. And because there is a lot of information to take in, to conglomerate together to try to figure things out. And I think that's the key, like you were asking before. How can we figure out what kind of guy Oswald was? But that the same thing applies to just anything with this case. What you want to do is you want to create an amalgamation of information from as many sources as possible. Do your own research, base it on as many viable things as you can, such as documents, witness testimony, things of this nature that can be verified, and paint your own picture of who you think Oswald was, or how you think the assassination went down, or what was going on inside the TSBD, moments after the shots, or what was going on in the Texas theater. You have to take all these things on their own and examine all the aspects of them, in a kind of separate division of everything else, and just kind of focus on one thing at a time and try to gather information from as many sources as possible, reliable sources, and just in your own mind, you can have a much clearer vision of how you think things went down, and whether you're right or not, who knows? And whether or not other people will agree with you doesn't really matter, because everybody is at a different stage. Like there's many stages of research, and some people are further along than others. Some people have some catching up to do. Some people just haven't looked into this yet or that yet as closely as they might have looked into this. So for any one person out there to tell you that they have all the answers, they're full of shit. Listen, I've been looking into this for 30 years intensely, and I can tell you nothing definitively that I know. I can speculate on a hell of a lot for you, but to definitively tell you some things, it's got to come from a source of reliable information. And then you must take those puzzle pieces and put them together in a manner that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's well said. That's how it is. It's a puzzle. And that's how I see it as well. I see it as a puzzle. And then once in a while, I come across a killer document and I go, ha, ha, and press that piece into that puzzle and go, right, I got that bit solved. And what you have to look at is basically roughly like that wall right behind you, Robbie. Just think of that as the puzzle, and you've only done that much in total out of everything. That's how much you've done. And then in that, basically that segment, you've got openings, and you're trying to basically fill these bits in, and that's only a thing from the last 10 years that people are basically saying like, well, I'm the focus is just on that. I'm going to do on that. Like Vince Palomara, that's with the Secret Service. That's what I do with Oswald. I just went, Oswald, I'll do the last 43, 45 hours, and that's it. I've read a lot of all the other stuff. And on top of that, I've got to read a lot more through Malcolm's paperwork. but that's not my puzzle. That's one of the puzzles that's on the shelf, basically one of the boxes with the puzzle, and it goes in there. And if I don't know if I'm ever going to touch any of that, but I'll make it available for anyone else who wants to look into it as such. Because the documentation brings you a lot of answers. You know, people's opinions, that's not going to help. Testimony helps. Affidavits, especially the fresh ones, help even more. And then it's an art for that person to talk 30 years later, and I wouldn't say up to the dots on the I, but in general recites what he said 20, 30 years prior. Does that make any sense? Or is he going to add anything to it all of a sudden to put a nail into the coffin for whatever the accused party and so forth? These are the interesting bits from a research point of view. Does it all add up? Are there secondary sources? This is another thing with
perfect example, Bart. We were just talking this morning. I was talking to Doug, and we were going over a couple things, and we were talking about the story of Gordon Arnold, okay, which I'm sure you've heard. Robbie, I don't know if you're familiar, but he was a 22-year-old Army guy. He just finished basic training, and he was allegedly on the grassy knoll in front of the wooden fence at the time of the shots. And he heard shots, and he hit the dirt. And then some guys came up and took his film, okay? And for years, everybody discounted, this guy being there because we couldn't find him in any films or photographs, and then once technology caught up with things, you could kind of see this guy in where he said he was in some of these, like the Mormon photo and things. And but that's not the essence of his story. The essence of his story is he was confronted by Secret Service agents behind the picket fence on the grassy knoll, who told him to get out of the area. So basically, he walked around to the front side of the fence. Now, if we take Gordon Arnold on his face, it's just a story, okay? We might be able to prove that he was actually there, but can we prove what he says happened? On its own, it's just a story, okay? Now, you take into consideration the other 5 or 6 people who stated that they ran into Secret Service agents on the grassy knoll immediately after the shots.
Roger Craig was one of them.
Roger Craig, you have Officer Joe Smith, Gene Hill, and there's a couple others. So his story starts to make a little bit more sense. It starts to add, you have to take all these other things, and if initially you didn't believe Gordon Arnold's story, you have to take all this other stuff into consideration. You have S.M. Holland, and what he said, and what Lee Bowers saw, and what these other people encountered. But there was supposed to be no Secret Service agents on the ground in Dealey Plaza, period, until Forrest Searles came back to the school book depository after Oswald had been arrested. So who were these guys? I mean, who knows? I mean, one person's story on its own doesn't mean shit. But when you have 5 or 6 people who don't know each other, who have no relation to each other, who are telling the same story, then that story starts to have a little weight to it, and it starts to mean more. And then you kind of think to yourself, okay, what does it mean if there's people on the grassy knoll identifying themselves as Secret Service agents when there were no Secret Service agents on the grassy knoll? And that's how you start to piece things together. You take a little piece of this story, a little piece of this one, and you start to make an amalgamation of all these stories in your mind and kind of see what starts making sense. If a picture starts to form, which can lead you in other directions to go research. And it's just one of those processes that's fascinating.
The whole Secret Service and the people showing badges and stuff like that, I buy that, but I don't buy Gordon Arnold because, first of all, he can't be seen in the Knicks film. That's one thing. And the other thing is
that right there,
he disappeared.
Robbie.
No, he disappeared for 10 years. He was in Nam, and he was
scared.
abroad.
He's scared. He was
Sorry?
scared.
Yeah.
He
Oh,
was
you're scared.
scared.
Yeah, you're scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he fucks off for 10, 15 years, and then he finally starts blubbing about it. And I'm going, yeah, okay. So 10, 15 years after the deed, you all of a sudden come out the woodwork. And that whole thing about the Secret Service badges, that was known already in 64. So he could have easily read up about it. So it doesn't make him a very reliable witness by himself at all. That's the issue. And that's by doing checks and balances when it comes to witness statements and people coming
They
forward.
found him in the Mormon photograph, Bart.
Sorry?
They found him in the Mormon photograph.
I didn't see him.
You didn't see him? Yeah, look that up.
I will. Oh, I feel a discussion coming on of biblical proportions. Ah, this is going to be great. This is how this goes, Robbie.
I know.
This is how this goes in research environment.
What would you do this on quick shit sometime?
Yeah, I look forward to that.
Guys, I appreciate the time you've given me to be able to talk about the case and also, help me bounce some questions off you. Is there a place where people can find you, Bart, if you want to start off, and then Rob will have you.
Nowhere. My work. I posted a forum, Reopen Kennedy case. Just hit that on Google, and all my work is mostly on prayer-man.com, prayer-man.com. I post my findings there. I've got some shocking news. I did my 4 papers that were released end of June, and I'm going to turn it into a book. So this shit's going to take me much longer, but yeah. Well, the thing is also, I found so much evidence in the last few years, especially from Malcolm's archives, that have managed me to be able to put dots on I's as such. And I now have the ungrateful task of turning those 4 papers, which is 550 pages, roughly around that, turn them into a book.
Make a film. No,
maybe. I was going to do a documentary, but you know what? From a time perspective, I'm going to give myself till about December, January to turn my work into a book, and it will be an ebook on Amazon and a print-on-demand book. So that's another thing. I've got to do 2 different versions of that particular paper, one with the links and one without the links. And what I'll do is, instead of putting footnotes in the book, I'll have one dedicated web page to that book, so you can read the book. And if it says like, oh, that's such and such, then people can go onto that dedicated web page and click on the link, and it will take you exactly right there and then to the document or the photograph or the video, what's being discussed as such. I'm not really happy about doing that. As a matter of fact, I'm quite pissed off about it, because I did these papers to basically not to have to do a book, but Malcolm went, you've got to do a book. And Malcolm is about the only person I actually listen to when it comes to all this stuff. And so I was like, thanks a lot. And I've got to go. So basically, I've got to go through these pages and do that. I gave myself a bit of a break over August and July and August a little bit. And I'm slowly going to start probably next month with doing that. I've done 2 chapters to see how it goes, but I had to talk to people about how do I go about this in the most fruitful way, because I don't want to do this twice. And so I'm going to work on that. This is my autumn job, my autumn homework. And then from there on, and I don't know what's going to happen after that, whether I'm going to do I would like to do a documentary, but I want some proper power behind me when it comes to the production and the company and so forth. It will be a European company. There's no way in hell I'm going to work with an American company on this. That's not me being racist, but I just want a different point of view, and people that, that tend to take this stuff up a little bit better. They don't have that emotional connection as Americans would have. So since it's a foreign thing. And after that, I don't know what I'm going to, after the 60th, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might write the odd article, because from Malcolm, the work as such that I've done. So this is one bag. I've done about 100 of them, and I've got 4 bags I kept behind. Anyway, I'm welcome. What are you going to do with that? I'm like, write articles, because there's so much shit in there that nobody's ever heard of before or in such detail. What's going to be a total hammer is the Oswald evidence between the Dallas police and the FBI. It is a clusterfuck of biblical proportions about how that shit was dealt with. At first they said, we gave him the rifle and some tidbits, this, that, and the other, and that was filmed as such. But the FBI took almost everything that night, and as much as they could. And it was returned. But when it was returned, there was all kinds of shit done with it that nobody can explain, or it just happened. And the beauty of it, the whole thing, was Malcom. He investigated the camera that was used for recording of the evidence as such, that the Dallas police did. Bill Alexander took credit for that. I don't know if he's the one that actually meant, but basically it's like one of these cameras where you just put the gun or whatever on there, document pictures, and the camera is 90 degrees right from top, and they basically press the button and they just wind it up and shoot on the next. Well, when the films were done, they were supposed to be processed. Then the FBI starts photographing this stuff as well, and pretends that the DPD didn't do this. And there's loads of frames missing. There's lots of evidence missing and so forth. When Malcom wrote an article about this in 1999, he came up with 6 scenarios of what was possible for what actually could have happened with that evidence and the films of it. And he went into it so deep that I've got about, I'd say, 5 or 6 inches of just paperwork just related to the Dallas police evidence, just the evidence, not specifics about pictures or documents or whatever, or objects, none of it whatsoever. Then I've got something on the Minox. I've got some really good material as well. Malcom told me that it was glued shut. He had it in Nara, and he says, I don't know what it was shut with, but it's like maybe Gorilla Glue or something like that, of that kind of sort of stuff, because you just could not break it open whatsoever. It was just glued shut. And there are many questions about that as well. Gus Rose is a perfect witness on that one, because the FBI sought him 3 times and tried to make him change it from a camera to a light meter. And he says, I'm not going to do that, this, that, and the other. You know, so I've got about 10 stories I can do in the years after. And then there's an idea that maybe William Law and I are going to work on a book, and that will be photography related as well, about the autopsy photos. I've got evidence as well, some really good stuff, really rare, very, very, very rare, that no one else has covered yet. So that's another one, an option, but I don't know. I need a break after this whole Prayer Man thing. And, you know, after the 60th, I'm just going to think about, well, what am I going to do next? It can also be that I walk away from the whole thing, because it's so time consuming. I mean, Robbie, you do all these things on the side. You talk about MK Ultra, you talk about stuff from the 70s and the 80s and so forth. But you get to a point where the information comes at such an overload, and where you just go away. And you just basically ask yourself, like, my God, I don't want to deal or hear one more thing about this. And, you know, when I finished with when I did my first release of the Malcom Blunt documents, so I didn't touch that stuff for 6 months. But I did work on my papers at the same time, because I needed to do that, because they needed to be finished. But I didn't want to scan one document in or deal with anything whatsoever regarding to that archive. And it's only back in June that I started picking up this stuff, because I was pretty much finished with my papers. And I was like, well, I still have to do that. But I can't wait to finish with the Blunt archive. And I've got about 10 bags left. So that's roughly about 10 weeks work. and then I don't know what I'm going to do after that. But I'm just seeing myself like I'm going to do this at least for another 18 months because I'm fully engaged with it, and just make sure it goes out the way that I intended to. Because that's another thing. I've done this all for free, so no fucker is going to mess with my stuff, and the creativity and how it's going to be brought forward and all that, and released. And then after that, I don't know what, we'll see. But
one thing I just want to mention, my show is not a conspiracy show. It's 1,200 something other episodes with academics and stuff. But picking the niche fucking topic of JFK to get clicks is the dumbest thing I've ever fucking heard in my entire life. I could have picked a way better thing than
nobody
that.
gives a fuck.
This has lost me guests from talking about this. People are like, I don't want to be associated with conspiracy stuff. And then that pisses me off because they call it a conspiracy. I'm like, this is fucking real.
They're even dumber than lone nutters. Fuck them. Fuck them all. Fuck them. Fuck them. So, but, I find it interesting.
We're a kids show.
Sorry?
We're a kids show.
I didn't hear that.
We're a kids show. You said the F word. We're a kids show.
I found it an interesting subject. I mean, after the Stone film, and then the internet came out, and I thought it was a really interesting subject on the internet. And I just went through it 3-4 years. And then I was fed up with it because I was just bored with all the conspiracy blather, blah, blah, CIA, blah, blah, and just went on and on and on. And in the late 90s, I quit. And I quit for 12 odd years. I mean, I shot a conspiracy photo story, a fashion story with a lone gunman and a sniper, Chinese sniper, a real hot chick, and had all kinds of male models that were conspiring, which I shot in a Masonic lodge and all that. And that was basically just inspired by all the reading that I did. I wasn't researching them, and it was only that I got sick of social media in the early 2010, 2011, that I started reading books. Got rid of Facebook, this, that, and the other, and just started reading books. I was off Facebook for at least 5 or 6 years, but we'll see. The thing is also, you get kind of fatigued, and I've got other interests as well, and I've kept those off. And now I'm getting to a point where I'm going, I've kept this off so much, I want some me time and dig into that.
I've had a couple Thelma and Louise thoughts a couple of times.
You get them. And like I told you, if you don't have haters, you're not doing it right. So
yeah. But had I known this was so big, because the funny thing is that when I said to myself 6 years ago, I'm gonna do 4 papers, 4 chapters, and I would go, oh, the interrogation, there's not much around. And then I found so much stuff, and there was so much I had to look into, and also segments that I didn't want to look into, but forced to do that because for context reasons, I had to put them in. The lineups, for instance, I don't give a shit about these lineups, but I had to put them in there. And that's a bit problematic, especially if you don't want to do it. If you go, I don't care about that. And then you have to do it. And that's painful. You really have to motivate yourself in actually doing it as such. That's the hard part, going into a subject matter and then go all of a sudden, yeah, but you got to do that as well and do that as well to get to that end point. And that's basically because I decided to go into chronology of the whole interrogations bit. But it's the best way to provide clarity, because you just see what's happening over what's happening at 2-3 o'clock and what's happening at 10 o'clock in the evening as such, and makes it much better to understand. It turns the body of work 3 times bigger, but as intended. But yeah, it's just the way it went.
Well, real quick, we're going to circle back to the original question. Bart, your links, say your links for the love of God. Prayerman.com, anything else that you got?
No, it's prayer-man.com. So
is that the underscore thing?
No, it's the dash in between.
Oh, that's a hyphen. Okay. Fair. Twitter as well too. Anything else you have?
I'm on Twitter.
You want to let them? Okay, I'll link it. It's fine. Rob.
Meet the Lone Gunman. Prayerman is Oswald. It's Lee Oswald. That's what I have on Twitter.
Rob, where's your links, man?
You can follow me on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7. You can also hear the Lone Gunman Podcast anywhere that you can listen to podcasts, even on YouTube. Also do a show, Quick Hits, with my buddy Doug Campbell. So make sure to check that out. And he regrets not being able to join us today. I did speak with him this morning. And Robbie, hopefully we can get him on here at a later date. We've had technical issues all morning. It's been a nightmare, but and I hate doing this by phone, and I apologize for that. Hopefully it sounds decent enough. Also on Facebook, the Lone Gunman Facebook page is there as well. My email address is thelonegunmanpodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to reach out and have a chit chat, I'll answer maybe. We'll see.
Well, I'll link it all in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Blank Podcast.